Welcome, dear students, to the massive open online course on Political Economy 2. In our module today, we are going to discuss about political development and modernization. The objectives of this module are as follows. We would first understand the concept of modernization, and then we will give a brief overview of the Rusthaus model before delving deep into the concept of political development. Now, there are three main and historical elements which were favorable to the inception of the modernization theory of development after the Second World War. First, there was a rise of the United States as a superpower. While other Western nations such as Great Britain, France, and Germany were weakened by World War II, the United States emerged from the war strengthened and became a world leader with the implementation of the Marshall Plan to reconstruct the war-torn Western Europe. Second, there was the spread of a united world communist movement. The former Soviet Union extended its influence not only to Eastern Europe but also to China and Korea. And third, there was the disintegration of the European colonial empires in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, giving birth to many new nation states, which we call the third world economies. These nascent nation states were in search of a model for development to promote their economy and to also enhance their political independence. So, according to the modernization theory, modern societies are more productive, children are better educated, and the needy receive more welfare. According to Smelser's analysis, modern societies have the particular feature of social structural differentiation. That is to say, a clear definition of functions and the political roles from the national institutions. And Smelser also argues that although structural differentiation has increased the functional capacity of the modern organizations, it has also created the problem of integration and of coordinating the activities of the various new institutions. The major characteristics of the modernization theory of development basically are modernization basically is a phased process. For example, I have already mentioned and I'll be explaining later in this module about W. Rusthaus model, which is basically divided into 5 phases according to the theory of economic development for a particular society. Secondly, modernization is a homogenizing process. In this sense, we can say that modernization produces tendency towards convergence amongst the societies. For example, Levy maintains that as time goes on, they and we will increasingly resemble one another because the pattern of modernization are such that the more highly modernized societies become, the more they resemble one another. So as according to Levy, he basically tries to say that as societies become more and more modernized, they try to converge in terms of resemblance towards each other. Thirdly, modernization is a Europeanization or an Americanization process. So in the modernization literature, there is an attitude of complacency towards Western Europe and the United States. These nations are viewed as having unmatched economic prosperity and democratic stability. In addition, modernization is an irreversible process. Once started, modernization cannot be stopped. And in other words, once third world countries come into contact with the West, they will not be able to resist the impetus towards modernization. Again, we can say that modernization is a progressive process, which in the long run, it is not only inevitable, but at the same time, it is also desirable. According to Coleman, modernized political systems, they have a higher capacity to deal with the function of national identity, legitimacy, penetration, participation, and distribution rather than the traditional political system. Finally, the final characteristic of modernization is that it is also a very, very lengthy process. It is an evolutionary change. We see a slow evolution of the society, of the economy taking place. Rather, it is not a revolutionary change. It will take generations, or we find that it takes even centuries to complete. And its profound impact will be felt only through the passage of time. So all these assumptions are derived from the European and the American evolution theory of the modernization that they have witnessed. Next, we come to the concept of the Rostow's model. Now, one of the principal applications of modernization theory has been in the field of economics related to public policy decisions. So, from this perspective, it is a well-known fact that the economic theory of modernization is basically based on the 5 stages of economic development that was proposed by W. Rostow in his model. Now, in summary, these 5 stages are: we have the traditional society, there is a precondition for takeoff, then we have the takeoff process, then we have the drive to maturity, and then the stage of high mass consumption. Now, according to this exposition, Rostow has found a possible solution for the promotion of third world modernization. If the problem facing third world countries resides in their lack of productive investments, then the solution lies in the provision of aid to these countries in the form of capital, technology, and expertise. So then there we have the Marshall Plan and the Alliance for Progress in Latin America. These are examples of programs which were influenced by the political theories of Rostow. The criticisms of the modernization theory are as follows. Firstly, development is not necessarily unidirectional. This is an example of the ethnocentricity of Rostow's perspective. Second, the modernization perspective only shows only one possible model of development. The favored example is a development pattern that has been witnessed in the United States of America. Nevertheless, in contrast with these circumstances, we can see that there has been development in various other nations like Taiwan. Even South Korea is a very illuminating example. And we must admit that their current development levels have been achieved by strong authoritarian regimes, unlike USA. Second set of critique of the modernization theory regards the need to eliminate traditional values. Third world countries do not have a homogeneous set of traditional values. Their value systems are highly heterogeneous in nature. For example, we find Redfield in 1965 distinguishing between the great traditional values, which we call basically the value of the elites, and then we have the little traditional values, which we call basically the value of the masses. So, we can say that the second aspect of criticism is the fact that traditional and modern values are not necessarily always mutually exclusive. China, for example, despite advances in economic development, continues to operate on traditional values. Moreover, it is not possible to say that traditional values are always dichotomous from modern status. For example, loyalty to the emperor can be transformed from loyalty to the emperor to loyalty to the farm. So you see, whenever we find traditional values inculcated in the system of the economy or the society, it can also be transformed, or it can also be targeted towards other measures to bring about economic efficiency. Next, we talk about what essentially is political development. Political development, again, is a big and diversified subject, and it is very much difficult to adequately explain. Its definition is conditional on the growth, modernization, and advancement of the rising states. However, the definition supplied by a renowned researcher is worth considering. Political development, according to Restore and Pai, is the development of institutions and practices that enable a political system to deal more effectively with its own fundamental difficulties in the short run while working towards a regime that is more response to popular demand in the long run. Armand asserts that it is the acquisition of fresh competence in the sense of a distinct function, structure, and orientation that together supply a political system with a diversity of difficulties. Eisenstand, on the other hand, describes political development as a political system's potential to continuously sustain new types of political demands and organizations. So it is a process that basically builds an institution's framework for resolving an ever-growing spectrum of social problems. We would now like to focus on Armand and Powell's views of political development. In spite of the various approaches, concentration on political institutions and processes is common to all. To Armand and Powell, it basically implies 4 problems. The problems are mainly state building, nation building, political participation, welfare, and distribution. State building implies, according to Armand and Powell, implies the creation of new structures and an increased degree of differentiation in the existing structure of the state. To say in simple words, the state must have a modern government, an administrative apparatus and agencies. It is notable that in the backward and underdeveloped countries, the state basically manages its own affairs with the help of a rudimentary apparatus or with very, very inadequate organizations. So it does not possess adequate machinery and separate organization to deal with all sorts of social, cultural, economic, and political problems which arise from time to time in a developing or underdeveloped country. Therefore, the state building can only occur when the government creates adequate machinery to deal with such multifarious problems. State building is also commonly associated with a significant increase in the regulative and extractive capabilities of the political system. With the development of centralized and penetrative bureaucracy related to the increase of their capabilities and the development of attitudes of obedience and compliance in the population, which are associated with the emergence of such types of bureaucracy. We now talk about the nation building. While the state building points out the improvement of the structure of the performance of the state building, nation building basically emphasizes that one should give up narrow loyalties, say loyalty to the tribal chief, loyalty to the family, loyalty to caste, loyalty to ethnic group, loyalty to religion, loyalty to region, like this. We should come out from such narrow loyalties and switch off all these things and totally serve as loyal to the nation at large. So in other words, it basically means that one should owe his allegiance to the state in preference over all sorts of narrow loyalties. So basically, it essentially implies in one term, national integration. So it is not necessary that state building and nation building may go together. There are many instances to show that in some developing countries where state building has been solved, the problem of nation building still remains to be solved. We have the example of Bangladesh, which got dismembered from Pakistan because the problem of national integration was not solved. They could not go above the narrow loyalty to languages. So then we have a state being carved out just because of their fight against language. In Lankan, the ethnicity problem has not been solved. So violence has erupted in that country from time to time. We now talk about political participation. Now, whenever a society develops politically, there is always an increasing demand of the public to take part in the decision-making process. These claims are generally put forward through such political structures as political parties, pressure groups, factions, cliques, and various organizations. Therefore, the government has to respond to these demands. So, political participation thus implies the development of the requisite political infrastructure and the responsive attitudes and bargaining skills of the elite. Increased political participation further leads to the demand that the values, benefits, and national income should be distributed equally amongst all sections of the society, irrespective of caste, color, creed, sex, etc. And equal opportunities should be given to all, and merit should be the only consideration in the criteria for selection in the high posts. Lucien Pai's view of political development is also extremely important because he is the pioneer amongst the earlier batch of writers to analyze the concept of political development in depth, and he has kept on evolving his ideas on the subject and has left an abiding impression on the entire literature of political development. Now, Pai had basically changed his concept by 1965, and thereafter he wrote that political development could be traced basically at three different levels: with respect to the population as a whole, with respect to the level of the governmental and general system performance, and with respect to the organization of polity. Firstly, political development with respect to the population as a whole implies that the citizens do not behave like a subject race, receiving orders from the higher authorities and obeying them unhesitatingly, but they do take an active part in the decision-making process. In this way, these people, they share in contributing and shaping the political decisions that take place in that society. Secondly, it means that with political development, there develops a greater capacity of the people to manage their own affairs, control controversy, or cope with the popular demands. That system does not allow the people's participation in the decision-making process. They cannot carry the people with them, and they fail to win the support of the people. So such a system will fail to win the support of the people, and hence people's political participation is extremely important. Thirdly, in regard with the organization of polity, a developed political system implies a greater structural differentiation, functional specificity, and immigration of the participating institutions. Yes, we can say that modernization and political development go together. There can be no doubt that it is modernization that basically brings with it political development. So political development is basically the political aspect of modernization. Therefore, the factors which affect both these two are common. What are the factors? They are as follows. One is traditions. There is no denying the fact that traditions have a greater hold on the public than anything else. So, traditions play a very, very important role in determining the form of the political system which the country adopts. In the Tsarist Russia, that is before the revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, there was a major problem with how to adjust the Russian traditions to westernization, which in their wake were bound to bring innovations with it. Though both USA and Russia have modernized themselves, yet they have a different political system according to their own traditions. This is also the case with India and China, which are modernizing themselves with their political traditions, which are traditional and different, intact. Second is timing. Time also affects both the process of modernization and political development. When India became independent in 15th August 1947, then our political leaders were keen to have a Western model because of the long British rule in this country and the experience of working of the Act of 1919 and 1935. Moreover, the Act of 1935 with some adaptations were still in force, but when our leaders visited Russia, they saw that the country had made tremendous progress because of socialism and planning, the centralized planning system and so on. So our first Prime Minister, Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru, also set up a planning commission and launched many of these 5-year plans. So Mr. Nehru also set the goal of the Indian National Congress as the socialistic pattern of society in the Awadhi session, that is basically the Madras session in 1955. It was repeated in the Congress session of Bhubaneswar in January 1964. Leadership is another very important point because the nature of modernizing political leadership largely determines the extent up to which the tradition is to be adopted in the process of modernization and political development. If traditions come in the way of modernizing process, then the leadership determines to what extents the traditions are to be discarded. Anyhow, the leadership at the top decides the pace of political, economic, and social modernization so that with the shortest possible time, the country may be able to catch up with the developed countries like the USA, the USSR, Western, Germany, Japan, etc. In India, we had our first Prime Minister, Mr. Nehru, and Mrs. Indira Gandhi also were very much familiar with the traditions and culture of our country, yet they were also bent up on modernizing the country in every way, and they did their best in terms of various plans and policy actions in that direction. They also adjusted socialism, democracy, and secularism to the traditions of the country. So we can conclude by saying that political development and modernization are the concepts that generally overlap and merge into one another in the ultimate analysis. We can conclude with the remark of Mr. C.H. Dodd that the whole problem of the distinction between political development and political modernization is full of ambiguities and the original difficulties. Both of them, instead of showing the sharp differences, basically converge into one another. So they are at the same time contributory and also complementary to each other rather than being contradictory to one another.